Hello, how are you? We are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Anti-Racism for Allies Q&A session. My name is Carrie Sawyer, and I will be one of your hosts today. This is a session where people can come and ask all of their questions, their most important questions that they have on anti-racism. Today, I would love to invite my incredible guest co-host to come on, pop her video on, Tina Dyer. Thank you so much, Tina. Um, Let me know. Okay, awesome. So I feel like I've had some Zoom things where it's like, nope, can't start the video. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Tina. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone today?
Sure. Carrie, thank you so much for the invitation. Excited to be here with you. I guess what I'd share with people about me is that I am dialing in from Northern California and in a city called Elk Grove. And we've been dealing so much with the smoke here, but I have started this new practice when I introduce myself to also acknowledge the people who lived here as the original inhabitants of this place. And so for me in my community, that's the Miwok Plains Native peoples. So I just want to acknowledge who they are and that they lived in this space that I get the privilege to live in now. And I work with a Fortune 50 company, been doing that for about 32 years now, and just enjoy the opportunity to help people explore their own experience around race and be equipped to be in dialogue in that space.
Awesome. Tina, I am so excited to have you have a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I'm glad that we're going to get to have this dialogue today. So before we start, I'm just going to share a couple slides just to kind of go over what the flow is going to be tonight, and then do some definitions, and then we will jump into questions. And so today, like I said, we are talking about people's most important, their number one questions on anti-racism. And so tonight we are going to set the tone. We're going to offer some definitions. It's always great for us to be in a shared space of learning and shared understanding as well. Like, what is anti-racism? What is allyship? We'll talk about those definitions, and then we will jump right into the questions that people have submitted this week to be answered. And as always, we love taking questions real time as well. So if you have a question, you can place that into the Q&A or into the chat, and we will pepper those into the dialogue tonight as well. Also, if you're feeling like you're having some insights or want to have some conversations or discussions in the chat as we're going, feel free to do that as well. We will pull that in to what we are talking about. So, and Tina, I know that you've done a lot of, you do a lot of great work. And so I bet that you also have some kind of best practices for creating a positive, safe space. And today, we just want to let you know that this is a safe space, that all questions are welcome. Any questions that come from a place of wanting to know more, do more, learn more, we welcome them, whether you think they're stupid or you maybe think you should have already known this, or even a little bit racist. We don't care. We're not going to judge your questions. This is a judgment-free zone, no shame and no blame. So one of the things that we also like to do as we're setting the stage is just give you some pointers and tools that you can take out into the world with you as you're having these conversations around race. And the first of those is that we are speaking for ourselves only. Neither Tina nor I are speaking for all Black or African American people or women or Californians or anything like that. We are just speaking from our own personal experiences and our own learnings and knowledge that we've gathered over time and over the years. And this is kind of an ever going process. And we encourage you that as you're having conversations around race, to drop all the assumptions, drop all the stereotypes, and just talk with that person that is in front of you and listen to what they're saying and take them as they are. The next thing that I like to call out is that we don't know everything. I know that I don't know everything about being Black, about American history, about being a woman. Tina, I don't know if there's anything that you want to claim you know everything about. We don't know everything, right? And so that means that we're all here learning together, and that sometimes we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. And it's really, how do we stand up in integrity? How do we if we don't know something, how do we go find out that so that we can apply that and keep that in our knowledge moving forward? This is a lifelong journey, right? You don't just stand up one day and say, I'm an anti-racist and I have my stamp and I'm good. I can go and go off and do whatever I want now. It is something that we're continually learning, we're continually pushing, we're continually looking for spaces both outside of us and inside of us where we can kind of obliterate those systems and of racism and racist ideologies. You can tell that I just watched Harry Potter. I'm like, obliviate. I'm like, that was an interesting word to use. But we're all at different points on our journey. And so there's no wrong place to be. There's no wrong place to start and dive in right where you are. And the last point that I like to bring up, and Tina, I'm going to invite you to see if there's anything that you want to add to this list. But the last thing that I like to bring up is that your role in driving change will be unique. You are uniquely situated in a family unit, whatever that looks like for you, in a community, in a workplace. You can influence the people around you, and people are always watching. And so your role and where you can change things, where you can interrupt racism, will be very different and very unique. But it's our jobs to figure out where those spaces are and to step in the way and interrupt and insert better systems, better ideas, better ways of thinking. So Tina, what else would you add to this list just to help get us in the right mind frame and create this safe space today?
Well, Carrie, I think you have a great list that you have here, and I really appreciate what you're doing, making a space for people's questions, because I find that where people have questions, there's where the real opportunity is for someone to learn, to grow, or to be open to another experience. One thing I think is always important in conversations like these is to really pay attention to myself, to my biofeedback, so my own body language. And one of the ways I do that is through breathing. So I have some deep breathing that I do. But when we talk about these conversations, it's normative for it to be uncomfortable. This is not something you took a class in school to be good at. And so sometimes when we experience discomfort, one, it's just important we recognize it, and then we have ways to address that. And so for me, that's the deep breathing, paying attention to that so that I actually can stay present in the conversation and not simply, shut down in the conversation or, some other form of escape. So that's what I'd invite people to do. Pay attention to your own body language. Notice when you feel expansive and open, and notice when you start to feel restrictive, and maybe that's a clue to check in on your breathing. Take care of yourself.
I love that. It's always a good sign. It's a good way for us to understand, where are we getting constricted? Where are we resisting or pushing back on these ideas? And even jotting those down and revisiting them later will help you to see where, like Tina said, where there's work to do. That's awesome. Okay, so we're going to jump right into these definitions. We do these every time. And if you have questions or need clarifications, feel free to throw all of that into the chat or into the Q&A. And so this first definition is by Race Ward, and I really like it because it's very simple. Anti-racism is the work of actively opposing racism by advocating for changes in political, economic, and social life. And so if we're going to break this apart, the first thing that we see is the work of actively opposing racism. The way I like to say it is that in this case, in anti-racism, there is no Switzerland, because in your inaction, in your silence, you're allowing racism to happen around you uninterrupted. And so anti-racism is the work of actively interrupting racist systems and racist thoughts when those come up around us. And so the second part of this is really the political, economic, and social life. So politics, the government, the economy, how money moves, where the access that we have to money or not, and then our social life is basically everything else, right? All the different systems that exist out there are kind of all encapsulated. And so anti-racism becomes this large thing that really goes through all the different aspects of our life because unfortunately, our country was founded on racist ideas. And so now, in this age, in this reemergence of the civil rights movement, we are learning how to identify those and how to interrupt them. Tina, when people ask you about anti-racism, what it means, what it looks like, how do you talk to them about it?
Well, it's really interesting because I love this expansion from just looking at an individual to looking at the broader impacts, and both are important. So I'm also anti-racist when I express anti-racist ideas. And so this is one of those places where I get to acknowledge where I am on my own journey, and that I would say I'm a recovering assimilationist. So I've worked in corporate America for as long as I've mentioned before. And what that means is I have, without intending to, adopted ideas, supported policies that help sustain policies and ways of being that are not equitable for everyone. And so the idea for me in that is now I have to pay attention to that and be mindful about where did that idea or that thought come from, and how do I take action in my sphere of influence in order to address some of those. So I see you have this slide here. I should have known,
You did
Ms.
know.
Carrie.
You like subconsciously like memorized it. Yeah, absolutely. And so Tina was talking about anti-racist ideas, and this is the idea that suggests that all racial groups are equal. Again, I love the idea of thinking about, okay, what does it actually look like in my work and my home, in our schools, and where are we seeing that play out differently? And I also like to call this out because this has a few different ways to look at it. But first, the historical content, the historical grounding that Black people were 3/5 of a person, right? So initially, when we were measured as slaves, once we were actually given status as humans, we were then just 3/5 of a person for counting us as property, right? And so this is very important in saying that we are all equal. There is no part person, everyone has this value. And then it also starts to get to the idea of white supremacy and how white supremacy is all based on white being the dominant, the best, the ideal racial group. And so this is in the exact opposition of
And another word I'd add in there, Carrie, is normative.
that. Mm-hmm.
So it's the standard by which everything else is measured. So this is normal, and anything different, that becomes the abnormal or deficient, or we would say that's the best practice. And that is a white supremacist, making white supreme above other ways of being. So yes, different is not deficient.
Right, exactly. And I feel like white supremacy will likely come up in some of the questions that we have later. But I know before starting to do a lot of this work, when I heard the word white supremacy, I thought of basically like a KKK person or like an extreme right, like nationalist person. But in this case and in this body of work, white supremacy is not that. Like, yes, that's one example, but white supremacy is, it's all the systems and the thinking that says that white is right and white is the best and that white is normative, to Tina's point. And as a person, and even maybe as a white person, it might be like, oh, but I don't think like that. But as we look around our world, we see so many examples of how white is placed over other groups in our imagery in every sector. And so this idea of understanding what does white supremacy look like in our day-to-day world, and where am I supporting that, is really a big part of this anti-racist work. And if you have a strong reaction to hearing the word white supremacy, that is a place to dig in, right? Because why are you having that reaction, and what can you do to learn and understand more about what that word means and what it means in the context of your life as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about it because I think it's going to come up as in some of the questions. So I really love this quote about anti-racism from Ijoma Oluo, who's the author of Let's Talk About Race. So anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself. And it's the only way forward. And so this idea that because we grew up in this country, there are racist ideas inside of us. We're socialized, it's normal for us. And so how do we find those and get rid of them and then replace them with ideas of equity? And ideas where, you know, we are all equal, and we're actually seeing that play out in the world around us as well. Okay, the next thing that we want to talk about just really quickly is allyship. And so this is a definition that really resonated with me. Allyship is an active, consistent, and challenging practice of unlearning and reevaluating, in which a person of privilege seeks to work in solidarity with a marginalized group. So Tina, when you talk about allyship, how do you explain it to people?
Mm-hmm. You know, a big part of my life experience in many settings is I can be the only one or one of a few in a professional setting, or maybe in a learning setting where I'm wanting to dive into something where just the people that are interested in that don't look like me as often. Mm-hmm. And I think what I have felt the most sense of allyship is that when something comes up that has a racist or exclusionary potential, that in that group, I'm not the person who brings it up, highlights it, who advocates for a change, or I should say I'm not the first person, but that those in the room who do not look like me recognize those moments. And in those moments, they engage the group in the conversation. And what that allows for me is to just be Tina. I don't have to represent a group. I'm just like all of them in that setting. And so that's how I've experienced allyship in ways that have really been helpful for me.
Yeah, that's great. And I love this kind of, proactive. You don't have to wait for the person of color to call out that that is racist or that's unfair. These are things that people are thinking about already, and that they're, on the lookout, and they're noticing that, and then standing up and using their power and privilege to disrupt the systems of racism that they're seeing happen around them. And so very similarly to anti-racism, allyship is an active thing, right? You don't just get an ally stamp and you go off to the side and you're done. It's something that you're constantly doing. And using your privilege. I heard this recently. I just read, I was telling Tina earlier, I just finished reading the book, Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad. And I recommend that book highly because it really broke down so many aspects of white supremacy in a very simple to understand, yet highly impactful way. And so this idea of allyship being active, the anti-racism being active, but not using your privilege for good per se, but using it in a way where you're actually giving away your power so that other people in the room who don't have that power can step into that space and fill that void and have the power and privilege that they deserve too, just as all races and all people are equal.
When you were saying that, Carrie, a thought popped into my mind. Sometimes I've had the experience of people thinking that allyship is, being my friend. That they're doing their work because they have a Black friend. And it's like, well, actually, I'm not someone's particular project. And the people that I'm talking about, they would be doing their own work. They are involved in those things, whether they've never met me. So I just want to talk about more of a connection for your own journey versus seeing it separate as something you're doing for someone else, but it actually is, it does support others, but it is for you.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's such a great point, because having a Black friend, a Black partner, mixed children, this doesn't mean that you don't still have the effects of white supremacy and racist ideas and systems inside of you, and opportunities to disrupt them both in your own thinking and how you see the world, and also around you. It doesn't preclude you at all. These are two separate things. You can have all the Black friends in the world and still have grown up here in these racist systems and have just as much work to do as someone who doesn't, right, have those same Black friends to call in. And that's actually, see, I learned so much in this book how to talk about it. It's called tokenism. When you're like, I have a Black friend, I have, partly Black children, I have a Black spouse. You're using that Black person to like benefit you and your idea of not being a racist. But in this work, we're not talking about not being a racist. We're talking about being an anti-racist. And that is the disruption of the systems inside myself and outside of myself. And so that is like the subtle yet so important difference, right?
Well said.
That book rocked my world. I love it. So I'm gonna be reading
on my list.
White Fragility is my next one. And it's interesting because both of these books are written for white audiences. And I think it's just very interesting to just see here how things are being talked about in ways that are easier to understand and that are just targeted in a certain way to help people to really look inside of themselves. Because, we talk about racism being a condition of the heart, right? And this work starting inside of ourselves and the ripple effect that comes when I start to act differently. I'm a powerful person and you are a powerful person too. And even if your sphere of influence is your family and raising kids who are not racist, that is humongous. Taking that outside into your community, into your job, but starting with yourself. And so this book, Layla Saad's book, is really about starting with yourself. And that's where we can all start. We don't have to worry about dismantling the government or what's happening in the NFL. It really just is about what's happening inside of us. So yeah. Okay, Tina, are you ready to get to some of the questions that we
Sure.
were asked? Okay, so actually had a lot of questions about Black Lives Matter this week.
Mm.
I think that just is based on some of the things that have been going on in the news. And so we're going to cover that as well. I will, yes, sorry, I just saw something in the chat. So the name of the book that I was talking about and that I think is great for people to really dig into what white supremacy means in their life and how to overcome that is called Me and White Supremacy, and it's by Layla Saad. Her last name is Saad. Okay, I'm going to keep an eye on the chat, so keep all that coming. So yeah, we have a lot of questions on Black Lives Matter this week, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So the first question that we have is, why are people so against Black Lives Matter? Tina, why do you think that is? What's your take on that?
Oh, well, my first question is, my first response to that is we'd have to ask them personally, because I don't know that there would be one answer that would explain, you know, that for every person who has an issue with Black Lives Matter. But again, I think it's very helpful to notice, why is there such a strong reaction? And so what is it that people are being resistant to? And somehow what I've heard some people share is that when you elevate one group, somehow or another, that is at the exclusion of other groups, or you're making some other statement. So people come back with this, well, don't all lives matter, and blue lives matter, and so what I see that as is a defense mechanism, because I am uncomfortable with talking about race. And when you say Black Lives Matter, you put the issue front and center on the table. And if I don't want to sit down and partake, then I find a way to push it away. And why people do that, I think that's based on their individual experience and their level of comfort.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, if we think about things we're not supposed to talk about, religion and politics, but I would say that there's a third one, and that is race. And we don't talk about it so much, it's not even on the list. It's like the invisible third or first thing on the list. Yeah, the idea of Black Lives Matter means that other lives don't matter. That is absolutely not what it means. All lives cannot matter until Black Lives Matter. And so before we've shown there's a really cool rainforest cartoon that kind of explains Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. But, it's just this idea, like if I said that my grandma had cancer, you would be like, well, my grandma has cancer too. Be like, that's not really a big deal that your grandma has cancer. Like you would never say that to someone, right? And so in this crisis of Black lives, that is why we're paying attention to them. And that's why we're calling it out. And it's not just Black lives that matter, right? I think that in this time, in the civil unrest, in the reemergence of the civil rights movement, Black Lives Matter movement is this incredible impetus to make us start thinking about how we're treating people, how the laws are creating safe spaces for some people and not others, and how we can change that using Black lives as this very first stone. But these are all transferable skills, right? Like the skill that helps you to not be racist is the same skill you use to not be sexist, to not show anti-Semitism, to not be homophobic, all of these different things, right? And so it is about, how do we address specifically the crisis on Black lives, and then how do we use those skills to not stop there, right? We don't need to wait for a Muslim person to get killed before we're like, Muslim lives matter. They matter now, right? But we want to figure out, how are we focusing and how are we helping to really mitigate what's going on and all the craziness that's happening.
I appreciate so much of what you said in there, and the things we don't talk about. So I think that's a real practical way, right? To notice, where do we have these silent agreements? Because the things that we don't talk about are often are indicators, right, of how we're protecting ourselves. And the other part here is, when people share that resistance to Black Lives Matter, it's kind of, how do we make it personal, local, and immediate? So it's kind of, well, tell me what troubles you about that. So people want to talk about these, like you mentioned before, these big grand ideas, but tell me about what's your experience. What are you resistant to? Because behind that resistance is some type of philosophy, maybe a theology, or just an internalization of white supremacist ideas that we're not even aware of, but that are driving these reactions and driving our opinions, but that we often don't actually slow down, reflect, and connect, make that connection to.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I think you make a really great point, because the racism is so ingrained in us, we don't even notice it a lot of the times. And so this idea that like racist people are bad and non-racist people are good, like it's in everyone, right? And it's in all white people, right? So it's not about being bad or good. It's about the fact that we have these things in us and we have the opportunity to acknowledge that that's true and then go on the hunt to find them. And that's why it's not a one-time thing. Like this is a lifelong journey, because it's in everything. It's in brown people. Like brown people are racist against brown people because that's how deep the racism in our country goes. Both your own race and other races. It's so ingrained. And so one of the other things that I think people get caught up in the noise of Black Lives Matter and not wanting, having a lot of resistance to that, is that they think of it just as this organization, or find fault with what the people or the founders have said. Specifically, there's this idea that Black Lives Matter, that they're Marxists or these other socialists, or these words that most people actually couldn't explain if you ask them, what does that even mean? But these are all bad things. And so instead of thinking about what the movement stands for, they're like honing in on these little things to be like, oh, that lady said this and I don't agree with that, so I don't agree with Black Lives Matter, which is crazy, because at the end of the day, Black Lives Matter just means that it's not okay to kill Black people on the street. You can't gun them down. You can't gun down innocent people. You can't gun down children. It's not okay. And you can't like be okay with just that sentiment. And at this point, the Black Lives Matter movement is more than the organization. It's more than the founders. It's more than whatever they're doing with the funds that they have been donated from people around the world. This is about the reemergence again of the civil rights movement, and understanding how we can, at this time, start to undo the systems of racism and redo a world where everyone can be safe and thrive and have the liberty that is promised to all people in in the foundations of our country, right? So, and people nitpick, not nitpick, they just go into the noise. Like, it's not about what that lady said. It's about killing innocent people and not being okay with that.
So because of the way our society is structured and the way we all personally choose to live, there are some things that are just invisible to us, right? So if I live in a segregated place, or if I live in a suburb and not some other place, there's some things that are just invisible to me. I will never experience them. I'll never know about them. And so the idea that what the Black Lives Matter movement, in my opinion, was trying to do is to make something visible to people that they weren't seeing. And I think, people being murdered, right? This is not new or shocking, although it is heartbreaking and crushing to people of Black or African American descent, but it often hasn't been visible, which means people can deny it exists, right, in certain ways. And yet we know that's not true. That people choose not to see it, right? Because I was thinking about this, like Emmett Till, right? His life, he was treated as if his life didn't matter. And we saw that to make that visible, it was published in a magazine so the whole world could see it, so it wouldn't be hidden. And so you think, so we can't say we've never seen it before, because we've seen it over and over again. And then there was Rodney King. We were like, well, this, goes away, right? But we watched and we saw it. Right, so it's not that that we're not aware that it's happening. And then we have George Floyd, right? So you think paper, print, you think video, and I think now we're up to where we may get to live stream. And what we're saying is it's visible. We can no longer deny it in ways that people choose to turn away because they can. And now it's very prominent.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. One of the questions is around like, what is the ultimate goal of Black Lives Matter? And so I just wanted to read their mission, because their mission it's a mission and it's a vision. And in that encapsulates so many things. So Their mission is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities by state and vigilantes. So that's by the government and then by like that person who walks into a church and kills 12 people, right? By combating and countering acts of violence, creating space for Black imagination and innovation, and centering Black joy, we are winning immediate improvements in our lives. And so really it is about these improvements in our lives to create safe spaces, to create spaces where we can thrive and live the lives that we want to live, right? But by building up this local power and national power to intervene in the violence. And so that is really their large vision. And that, again, is in so many ways, like even how you define violence. In this case, you know, we're talking about literal violence, but the effects of violence and what that looks like in a school system or in a neighborhood or in so many different things. How do you take that larger meaning of violence and expand that to just like negative impact, right? What are the negative impacts that are being placed on Black communities, Black and brown communities? And if you actually go to the Black Lives Matter website and read about their mission and what they believe, they're very inclusive in what they're talking about. You know, they talk a lot about trans lives and different, you know, LGBT communities, people all around the world, right? It's not just Black lives. And so I just encourage you to go and check them out. And when you read these articles, it's actually interesting. If you try to see what is Black Lives Matter doing, there's not a ton of information around like, they're actually like lobbying for this thing or lobbying for that thing. And I think it's just because of the fact that there's chapters all over the world. There's chapters in a lot of major cities, there's chapters in a lot of different countries, and they're all doing what they can do in their sphere of influence to disrupt and dismantle the racist systems that are around them, and specifically getting in that way of the violence that is happening against Black people.
You know, a couple of thoughts came up when you were talking about that, but I also think this has another defense mechanism is that if we give someone a label, then I don't have to engage. So if I say you're Marxist, then that's the end of the conversation. If I say, oh, that's a Black Lives Matter thing, and I have an idea in my head what that is, I don't have to entertain that or consider it. So that's the other invitation. Notice when we're using labels as a way to block or prevent conversation, because that's kind of one of the main defense strategies is I won't engage in conversation. And if I find a shortcut, I just give you a label, put you in a group or a box. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we do this, right? You're Republican, you're Democrat. So now I no longer have to listen to your ideas, right? And as if all those people have only one view or one perspective. And so if we can't get to conversation, right, we don't get to a place where we can move anything forward. But again, personal, local, and immediate conversation and dialogue about actual people.
Yeah, I think that's really great. So another question, this is our last question that we have specifically around Black Lives Matter. So I'm going to read kind of the whole context of this question, and it again goes back to some of the things happening in the news and the media. So I'm astounded by the number of people, some friends and family, who are anti-racism or anti-unity. I was saddened by the boos during the KC football game on Thursday. I see that many white people are excusing their hatred because they say that the Black Lives Matter organization is Marxist, self-proclaimed perhaps. Thoughts? Do you think that there is value in clearly separating the movement and the organization? What would you say to someone who cannot separate the two? And so I think that we've spoken to a lot of that already, but just wanting to reiterate that at this time, like the Black Lives Matter movement is much bigger than what the organization like just started with, or what the founders are or are not doing, or what they did or did not say in the past. It's so much bigger because we have this opportunity to kind of rewrite the world that we want to live in, starting right here with Black lives. So I think that it's super valuable to separate the two. And the thing is, and I've been thinking about this a lot because I get a lot of questions about how do I convince someone who has some crazy idea or thinks that racism doesn't exist, or thinks that Black people, it's their fault, or like whatever. How do I convince them that what they're saying isn't true? And so I think that one thing just to remember is that as logical as we feel we are, human beings are not logical. We are so irrational. And right, so you want to like bring logic, you want to bring facts, you want to bring these different things to these conversations and these arguments, but in some cases it will not matter at all because that person has an idea, a belief system, and it's very ingrained in them. And no matter what logical, reasoned argument you bring, you're not going to break through that, right? And so just thinking about, is it the best use of your time to try to convince someone who is holding on to racist ideas that they should stop holding on to their racist ideas? Or is it a better use of your time to go and find someone who is open to unlearning their racist ideas and partner with them on how we rebuild this world and these systems that look the way that we want it and accept all people in and help everyone to be safe and thrive? And I know that's easier said than done in a lot of circumstances, especially when you think about family and close friends, but I honestly still believe that the back and forth that people want to do is just noise. It's a distraction from the real work that needs to be done because there's so many people who want to do this work, so many white Americans, so many allies who want to do this work now, fighting or squabbling with people who don't. That's fine, stay in your corner. You can try to bring them some information. They may or may not hear it, but our work is on building, not trying to bring these people who it's just not going to happen in some cases.
Yeah, and I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be channeled. So if you're spending energy there, it's not available to you somewhere else. And what is often can be helpful is a question. What happened to you? Where did you form that belief? And they get to do that work and reflect, and you can go off and do something else. The other thing I would mention is a really great resource, I think, to talk about this is My Grandmother's Hands.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about racialized trauma and the pathway to mending our hearts and bodies. So you've mentioned this a couple times, Carrie, about how this is ingrained in us. I would say it's embodied within us. So a lot of this is our autonomic responses, right? It's reflective now, reflexive, I should say now, to have a reaction around race. And so unpacking what that experience is like is very much like all other traumas. It takes time, and that's a great resource to engage in that conversation. And then the last thing I would say that can be helpful is when people reflect on their own narrative. So in courageous conversations, one of the questions they ask is, what's your first awareness of race?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Every person can think of a story when they first became aware. That helps us to start unpacking our own narrative and maybe open us up a little bit more to the conversation in our own.
Yep, absolutely. Again, starting with yourself, because that is the sphere that we have the most control over, and can have a ripple effect, again, bigger than what we even know. Because I want to say this again, I know I've said this before, but someone is always watching you. And we, as light workers, as anti-racists, as people who want to make the world better, we're modeling what that looks like. And when you stand up for something, people are watching you and you're giving them permission to do the same. When you stay quiet, they're like, oh, well, I was thinking I might say something, but they stay quiet. So that also gives them permission to stay quiet. And so even if it's the one, you're having an argument with someone in your family or a friend or deep discussion about something around racism and you are not getting through to them, you don't know who else in the room is listening, like, you know what, that's a good point. I never thought of it like that. We don't know where our words and our energy is going and how it's influencing the people around us for the better. And so being able to be that example at any time that we can has a bigger impact than what we know. I always believe that. So, okay, so we are going to keep talking. We're going to talk a little bit about the goal of anti-racism. I really like this question. I love all the questions that we get, but this one is, so what is the goal of anti-racism? Is it to achieve equality, to achieve awareness, or something else? How would someone know that they are anti-racist or not just pro-equality? So that's kind of like a second part of the question. But Tina, what do you think? What is the goal of anti-racism? If someone's like, what is the point of all this anyways? Like, what do you guys want? What do you want to see in the world? How would you talk to them, especially when they talk about, equality, awareness? Like, what are the things that we're trying to do when we're engaging in the work of anti-racism?
Well, I don't think there's probably a better time, at least in my life experience, to think about what's the point of all of this? What's the goal when you think about we're in the middle of a pandemic?
Yeah.
And think about how I'm thinking about how our life is organized. I mean, think about how all of our lives are connected, whether we're aware of it or not, right? So I'm thinking about the essential workers who have been working so that I could have the privilege of working from home and go to the grocery store and still get everything that I need, while maybe that's not the case for them. I'm thinking about the medical system that we have and how that's shown up and the disparities between who gets care and who doesn't have access to care. So I think if what I'm thinking about is if we think about ourselves as a nation or as a country and the impact that we want to have in the world and the society that we want to have, what's going to happen if we continue the path that we're on? I don't see how it continues to work for those at the top, while it increasingly does not work for people who are lower or at the bottom, more toward the bottom, as the bottom increases. I would say that the ultimate goal is to actually to have a country or a nation that's working for many more people so that we actually can do greater things in the world other than maybe consume and maybe have a better, what's the word that I'm looking for? That we can offer something more than what we're offering now, the inequality that people are experiencing.
Yeah, it's about more than just like the survival, right? I mean, if we think about how many people are unemployed right now, 40 million and counting. If we think about how many people don't have a living wage, if we think about everything with DACA and everything with, alien people not having access to what they need, that are full functioning, contributing members of this society. And thinking about that group just growing, 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 and the unrest in that group growing, 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 growing. I mean, at a certain point, there's a breaking point, right? And bad things happen when we get to that point. And so I love that you paralleled this with the pandemic, because having this opportunity to pause and to see things in stark relief that we have not seen because we've been moving way too quickly. And thinking about, okay, well, what can we create? Even just like thinking about working from home, like, all right, well, this is kind of good for some people, right? Like they're thinking about, well, how can I continue this? What are the benefits that I'm getting from this? When we're able to exist in a world where the systems are creating equity for everyone, we're not wasting energy. We're able to be our best selves, come up with better ideas, like solve the world's problems, right? Now we spend so much energy just trying to survive and fighting each other, right? And if we're not doing those things, what are you doing? Like imagine what if you had an unlimited bank account, like what would you do with your time and your energy, right? That stress. See racism as one of those stressors for people. These are things that people of color fight every single day on large and small levels, and not having that on your shoulders, being able to go out and be your best self and not have to worry about the discrimination or the oppression that's happening. I know that's painting a really beautiful picture of the world that we would love and we feel so far away from. But we're taking the steps that we have the opportunity now to take these steps to move closer and closer to that. So I think it's creating that world where we all can thrive the way we want to thrive.
Carrie, I could not agree more. And so I want to plug another book called The Black Tax, The Cost of Being Black in America. And he really does quantify what has cost us as a country in creativity and innovation. So you think about all the challenges that we're facing. Well, how does it serve us to have underutilized potential and creativity and innovation that can help us face the challenges that we're experiencing, whether it's, climate change or, whatever that is, we are losing out because we're not leveraging the gift of every citizen, in our nation.
Absolutely. And I will make a note to send all of these different resources afterwards to everyone so that you can have all the different books and resources that we have mentioned today, because we're getting some good ones. Thank you, Tina. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about the next question. This is an interesting one. So this one is around work, and how we bring in anti-racism. So how can I implement anti-racism work into our daily work environments? And I love this question because this person understands that this is a all the time thing. They're not like, how can we do an anti-racism training and benefit from that? They're like, we want to integrate anti-racism work into our daily work environments. And Tina, I know that you are working at a Fortune 50 company. What is like, I would love to just hear, since everything that's happened, since George Floyd, what has your company talked about? What has it been about around like anti-racism? And maybe if you can't share, that's totally fine. I totally forgot. Maybe you couldn't share, but what, and maybe also what you've seen other companies doing as well, if you want to couch it in that. But what are people doing around getting anti-racism into their company, and making that a part of like how they think and how they, how they work?
Mhm. It's a good question, and I think people are doing lots of things. One common thing that we've seen is for CEOs to make statements about the organization's position and making some commitments, and some of those are very specific to being very general. In our organization, one of the things that I did is I began implementing these listening circles. So, we have people all over the country, but specifically in the area of Minneapolis, we got people together and we put together a listening circle to give people a place to express what they were experiencing. Also integrated a third thing, a video or something that people could watch to help them move forward. But the idea is increasing the capacity for people to have these conversations. It is what is critical. There is training that's being developed and designed. It's important, though, as we think about that, because people want to do that, is to really think through, is this training actually getting to the core of the issues, or are people just taking some concepts, throwing something together and going, whoop, check the box, we did anti-racist training, now we're good to go, and we can move on.
Here.
Yeah, people need clarity. A lot of people don't even understand this concept of anti-racism, moving toward action, looking at things more broadly. So setting common language and definitions for an organization is really key to make sure we're all having the same conversation, and increasing the capacity, creating spaces to hold those conversations, I think is also key. Those are some ways to get started.
Absolutely. And I would love to hear what companies are doing to look at their policies and their practices, and looking at how anti-racism falls into that. Because, I mean, if we think about so many conversations in corporate America about, there's no women at the top, there's no people of color at the top, we don't have enough Black engineers, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that is the direct result of a racist system, like directly. Anytime you look at the top of a company and you see that it's only white people, that is because the system is designed that way. And that is a system that is showing that white people are the best, the brightest, the strongest, the smartest. And so they're all at the top. And even if we're like, no, that's not true, we don't think like that, like the proof is in the pudding, because that's what you're seeing, right? And so having a company have the I don't know, the mind, the openness, the like strength to actually like say, hey, these are the racist systems that exist at our company. And like, just call that out for what it is. And then say, this is how we are going to actually figure out how to dismantle those systems and build systems that are equitable for all. Because if you look at the makeup of your company and it's XYZ percentages of these different types of people, and that is not exactly reflected or very closely reflected at the top and throughout all of the levels and all the roles in your company, then you know that you have systems of inequity and equality. And then if you want to take it a step further, if you look at your company and you're seeing that it is not mirroring the census data, then you know that your company is built in a way that is supporting these like racist structures and ideas. And so just like going all the way there, like calling a spade, and then saying, all right, well, we're not going to fire anyone. Well, maybe in some cases you do need to do that, but we're not firing all the white people. That's not happening. But what we are going to do is build a system so that we can actually see what's wrong with the way that we hire people specifically. For example, maybe starting with how hiring happens. We're going to look at the whole hiring process. We're going to see, are people of color coming into it? Are women coming into it? And I used to work in high tech. That's why I always think about women and people of color. But where do they fall out in that system? How do we fix that, right? So that over time, you can see these changes start to happen, so that you do see the equity, you do see the representation. And it's in so many things. It's like pay. Are we paying everyone equitably? Are we, is this another company where women are getting 80 cents to the dollar and Black women are getting like 65 cents to that? That stat is wrong, but it's lower. So don't quote me on that. But there's these systems that show us like unequivocally that something is off, and we've chosen to continue to ignore that. What company is going to be bold enough to say like, call it out and then fix it? I would love to see that. That would be amazing.
I agree with you. Your system is perfectly designed to get the results that it's getting. And John Powell, he talks about structural inclusion. So there's some kind of structural in place that is creating these disparities. How do you design a system that would structurally make sure the inclusion happens? And that's the next level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it might not be designed that way on purpose, right? It might be designed that way, like unintentionally, or different gates and structures aren't set in place. So I'll give an example, another one around hiring. I worked for multiple tech companies where certain groups and certain managers would hire people from their exact region in the company that they came from. And this one department of like hundreds of people would be like 25% one region in another country. It's like, so this is like this idea of like nepotism and just hiring the people that and it's done across all different races at all different levels and all kinds of companies. But why is that a structure that's okay, right? Like, why is it okay for you to hire 30 people from your neighborhood versus hiring people from all around and doing the work that it takes to find the best candidates and to find diverse candidates who are amazing, just as amazing as the other candidates that you're looking at, if not more amazing, right? So just an example, like we see these systems, we see the output, but we don't do anything. We just think that it's okay.
To piggyback on that, Carrie, and then when we hire people, that people are very comfortable with token representation. But if you get more than 3, then it's like, uh-oh, that's going to disrupt things.
Too many Black
so
people.
That it right? And so, and so literally, I've had someone say to me that they were called in, they had a staff of, I don't know, 40 people, and they had hired 3 Black people, and another white colleague reported to their manager, this person is hiring a lot of Black people, and she was called in to be made aware that people are noticing that. And so that's just an interesting, again, this is that white supremacy of that when we are not comfortable, then we take action to limit what others are able to do. And that's structurally kept in place by the people who support racist policies or ideas.
Yeah, and the total double standard there. How many white people were hired in a row that no one was ever called out for hiring? Too many, right? And so it's not about too many or too few, it's about how do you have representation? How do you have diverse people? But like, why is it okay to do it on one side and not the other? But that's all about white supremacy, right? So.
And another indicator is if you're not able to retain diverse talent. A lot of people say, well, they wanted more money, or well, they weren't. It's a really good indicator that you don't have an inclusive culture. They're the only one of a few, tokenism or things, and eventually, especially your top talent, they'll find another opportunity. And they won't spend the time to give you the feedback, because what purpose will it serve if you weren't willing to listen when they were there? Then by the time they leave, it's a moot point.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we are at 4:56. I want to take one more question. Let's do number 6, because I think that this is an interesting one as well. So, is learning with books or with action better? How would you answer that, Tina?
Well, I always ask those kind of questions the same way. I'm an and kind of girl. All right. So, and that I think speaks to all of this. When we get to this, everything is a binary focus. It has to be this or that. That's an indicator that we're not really having very deep conversation. There are so many nuances. There are times when we definitely need to be focused in on gaining some information, acquiring some knowledge so that we can walk in wisdom. And there are some times when we need to take action, immediate, personal, local, immediate action. Hey, this is an election year. That is some personal, local, immediate action that we need to take, right? But and we need to be informed as we take that action. So that's, I would say, and.
Yes, I love that because there are so many resources out there, and I even understand that, you know, it can be overwhelming to try to sort through and filter through. But one thing that I would do, or what I recommend, is first to say that there's no wrong place to jump in. Whatever speaks to you, jump in there. And there are so many organizations that have taken the time to curate different lists of books, videos, podcasts, people to follow, etc. Go and find a trusted source, you know, whether that's NPR or PBS or CNN or Medium, or like, I don't know, Good Housekeeping had a like pretty legit list of like anti-racism resources that you can go and check out. And so just go and start to do that personal work and start to educate yourself. And I love the phrase that you used, walk in wisdom. I definitely want to quote that in some of our materials, because that's so important, right? But we do learn so much from action. And specifically, I want to talk about action when we are afraid, or action when we are unsure if what we're saying is right or perfect, right? We learn so much from making mistakes. And in this space where we are finally having the courage and the call to have these difficult conversations, these personal conversations around race, around white supremacy, around these systems and structures that we want to change, we're not going to always say the right thing. I'm not always going to say the right thing. White people aren't going to always say the right thing. Like, we're all going to put our foot in our mouth, and we're all going to have the opportunity to stand up in integrity, to apologize when needed, to go and educate ourselves, and then to do better next time. And that is really all anyone can ever ask of you. That's all that anyone can ask. If you do that, then you're golden. And this idea of, like, a lot of people, I get a lot of questions around leaders who are afraid to say something because they don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to say the wrong thing. And I would say that staying silent is far, far worse than saying the wrong thing when you're coming from a place of trying to stand up and speak out for equity, for justice, for, for anti-racism. Like, go for it. Like, try, make your huge mistake, take the feedback that you get with openness and with a big heart and with humility, and then integrate that and go educate yourself and go do better next time. Staying silent means that you are siding with whatever racist idea is being passed or is you're seeing happen in front of you, because you're not interrupting it. And again, anti-racism about actively opposing the racist systems around us, interrupting them. And if you're not doing that, then you are not acting as an anti-racist in that moment.
Relationships, I think, are something else that is really essential. Enlarging your circle so that you can have more exposure to do what you said, to build those places where you can have conversation. I think that also helps some expedite your growth.
Yes, absolutely. All right, Tina, we are at 5 o'clock. Are
That
there
was
any?
fast.
I know it goes so fast. Even an hour and a half goes fast. I've been doing a couple of those. It just goes fast no matter what. So it's, Tina, thank you so much for coming and to talking with me today. Are there any last words or any last thoughts that you want to leave our audience with today?
Well, I'll leave it with James Baldwin, his quote. Not everything faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. This is our moment to face and bring about change.
Yes, that is beautiful. Thank you so much, Tina, for being here. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to another episode of our Anti-Racism for Allies Q&A. You can check us out again next Wednesday, same time, same link. So you can just go ahead and save it. And then we are still collecting 1,000 questions, your most important questions on anti-racism. So please go to inclusionfirstproject.org and submit your question. You can also do so directly to me on Instagram or on Facebook as well. I'm happy to answer them. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tina. This has been amazing.
Thank you for your commitment to this space.
Thank you, Tina. It's my pleasure. We'll see everyone next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.